The room itself felt frozen in time, as if the moment of loss had permanently settled there and refused to move on. It was different from every other room in the mansion, not in size or luxury, but in spirit. While the rest of the house gleamed with polished marble floors, towering chandeliers, and carefully curated art pieces that spoke of wealth and success, this room carried a quieter, heavier presence. Soft lamps replaced the bright chandeliers, their warm light spreading gently across the walls, creating long, calm shadows that seemed to breathe with the passing hours. The light was never harsh here, as if even illumination feared disturbing the fragile peace that lived within these walls. Against one wall stood a modest side table, carefully arranged, almost reverently. On it lay neatly stacked medical files, reports and scans collected from across the world. London, New York, Singapore, names of hospitals and specialists written in bold letters, some pages stamped with official seals, others covered in handwritten notes and signatures. Each file represented a journey, a flight taken in desperate hope, a conversation filled with cautious optimism, and an ending that always sounded the same. These papers were more than documents. They were reminders of sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and the slow realization that money, for all its power, had limits. Arav would often glance at those files, not to read them, for he knew every word by heart, but to reassure himself that he had tried everything. Or at least, everything money could buy. Sometimes he would straighten the stack, aligning the corners perfectly, as if order could bring control back into his life. Other times, he would simply stare at them, his eyes unfocused, his mind drifting back to the faces of doctors who had once spoken with confidence and left with quiet apologies. The air in the room always carried a faint scent of medicine mixed with fresh flowers. Arav made sure that a new vase was placed there every morning, filled with flowers his mother loved, simple ones, never extravagant. He avoided roses, believing they were too dramatic, too loud for a room that thrived on silence. Kamla noticed these details, even if she never commented on them. Each small act felt like a language they spoke without words, a mutual understanding shaped by pain and love. The wheelchair sat near the window, positioned carefully so Kamla could see the outside world. Arav had measured the angle himself, adjusting it slightly until the view was just right. From there, she could watch the city unfold, morning sunlight reflecting off glass buildings, evening traffic moving like glowing rivers, night lights flickering endlessly. It was a view of motion, of life continuing, and sometimes that comforted her. Other times, it reminded her of everything she could no longer do. Kamla often rested her hands on the armrests, her fingers thin but steady, nails neatly trimmed. There was dignity in the way she carried herself, even in stillness. Arav admired that strength, even as it broke his heart. He remembered her as a woman who never sat still, always moving, always doing something for someone else. Now, she was still, and the contrast felt unbearable. Time behaved differently in that room. Minutes stretched into hours. Conversations from the rest of the house felt distant, muted, as if the walls themselves chose to protect this space from noise. Arav liked it that way. Silence had become his companion, his shield. In silence, he didn't have to explain his guilt. In silence, he didn't have to hear reassurances that felt hollow. Sometimes, when Kamla slept, her breathing slow and even, Arav would sit alone and let his mind wander. He would remember the first hospital room after the accident, sterile and cold, filled with the sharp smell of antiseptic. He would remember how small and helpless his mother had looked, and how the world he knew had cracked open in that moment. The room they sat in now felt like an extension of that hospital room, softer, warmer, but still marked by the same loss. He often wondered if Kamla thought about the same things. If she replayed the accident in her mind the way he did. If she blamed herself for insisting on going with him that day. The thought terrified him. He couldn't bear the idea that she might be carrying guilt as heavy as his own. And yet, in her eyes, he saw a sadness that went deeper than physical pain. Kamla, in her quiet moments, studied her son when he wasn't looking. She noticed how his face hardened whenever a doctor's name was mentioned, how his shoulders tensed when he entered the room, as if he were bracing himself for a battle he could never win. She remembered the boy he used to be, restless, curious, full of dreams. That boy still existed somewhere inside him, she believed, buried under layers of responsibility and regret. The soft lamps cast a gentle glow on Arav's face as he sat beside her, his expensive suit often wrinkled from long days at work. The contrast was striking, power and vulnerability sitting side by side. Kamla wanted to reach out, to tell him that she was proud of him, that she didn't measure his worth by her ability to walk. But she feared that words would only reopen wounds that barely seemed to heal. The medical files remained untouched most nights, yet their presence was loud. They whispered of final diagnoses, of phrases like, permanent damage, and, unlikely recovery. Arav hated those words. They felt definitive, cruel. He preferred to believe that somewhere, someone had missed something, that hope still existed in the spaces between those lines of text. There were nights when Arav imagined tearing the files apart, throwing them away, freeing the room from their weight. But he never did. They were proof of effort, of love, of refusal to give up. Letting them go felt like admitting defeat, and he wasn't ready for that. Kamla sensed the room's heaviness, but she also felt safe there. It was a place where she didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to smile for visitors or reassure distant relatives. Here, she could simply exist. And that, in itself, was a small comfort. Outside, the mansion buzzed with activity, staff moving efficiently, schedules being followed, life organized down to the smallest detail. Inside this room, however, life paused. It waited. It held its breath, suspended between what had been lost and what might still be possible. Neither Arav nor Kamla realized it yet, but the room that felt frozen in time was quietly preparing for change. The soft lamps, the stacked files, the silent wheelchair, all of it bore witness not just to pain, but to resilience. And though hope seemed distant, it lingered there, fragile but persistent, waiting for the moment it would finally be seen.